The year was 2157, and the curved artificial skyline of New Washington Colony gleamed against the backdrop of distant stars. Officer Trent Miller adjusted his patrol uniform as he guided his enforcement vehicle through the busy orbital lanes. His face was set in a permanent frown, eyes scanning the traffic for any sign of what he considered trouble. Officer Miller had served the Colonial Security Force for 15 years. He took pride in keeping the colony safe, though his methods raised eyebrows among his colleagues. He particularly focused on vessels from Earth, especially those piloted by people from what was once called the American South. Miller came from 3 generations of orbital citizens and carried the common prejudice that Earthborn colonists were backward, unrefined, and likely to cause problems. "Control, I've got a suspicious transport at coordinates 227-3409, Miller reported into his comm unit. "Outdated model, Earth Registry, requesting permission to conduct a stop." "Reason for the stop, Officer Miller?" The voice from Control sounded tired, as if this was a regular occurrence. Miller squinted at the small transport vessel. It was clean but at least a decade old, moving steadily but slightly slower than surrounding traffic. "Vehicle is impeding flow in a high traffic zone," he said, though the transport was well within legal speed parameters. "Proceed with caution, officer. Remember the new protocol." Miller grunted an acknowledgement. The new protocol was just another way headquarters tried to restrict real police work, in his opinion. He activated his pursuit lights and pulled alongside the transport. Inside the modest vessel, Justice Warren Bennett noticed the flashing lights with a small sigh. At 81 years old, the Supreme Court judge of the United Federation of Planets had experienced this scenario too many times to count. He had spent his life working within the system, rising to the highest judicial position in human-controlled space, yet still faced the same prejudices he had encountered as a young man. Bennett eased his transport to a complete stop in the designated pullover zone, keeping his hands visible on the controls as the officer's vessel locked alongside his. He watched the officer approach through the connection tunnel, noting the man's stiff posture and hand resting near his weapon. Officer Miller's voice came through the external speaker before the airlock had fully cycled. "License and registration. Where are you headed today?" Bennett pressed the button to open the cockpit shield. "Good afternoon, officer," he said, his voice deep and measured. "I'm returning to the Federal District." He reached slowly toward the console to retrieve his identification. "Keep your hands where I can see them," Miller snapped, his hand now fully on his plasma pistol. Bennett froze, then slowly raised both hands. "My identification is in the console compartment, officer. I was reaching to provide it as requested." Miller's eyes narrowed. He took in the elderly black man dressed in simple but high-quality clothes. Nothing flashy, but something about the man's calm demeanor irritated him. Most people showed proper nervousness when stopped. "What's your business in the Federal District?" Miller asked, stepping closer to peer into the transport's cargo area. "This vessel is registered for personal use only. Are you transporting any unauthorized goods?" "I am returning from a diplomatic assignment," Bennett replied evenly. "And no, I carry only personal items and official documents." Miller scoffed. "Diplomatic? You?" He made no attempt to hide his disbelief. "Step out of the vessel for a standard scan." Bennett considered his options. He could reveal his identity immediately, but years of experience had taught him valuable lessons about these encounters. Sometimes, allowing situations to unfold revealed systemic problems that needed addressing. "May I ask the reason for the scan, officer? I believe I'm entitled to know what violation you suspect me of committing." Miller's face hardened. Questioning an officer's instructions can be considered obstruction. "Exit the vessel now." As Bennett carefully unbuckled his safety harness, a notification flashed on Miller's wrist device. He ignored it, focused on what he was certain would be a productive search. The elderly man moved with deliberate slowness that Miller interpreted as reluctance or possibly guilt. "The scan is merely procedure," Miller said, his tone suggesting otherwise. "Travelers from Earth often forget colonial regulations." Bennett stepped through the airlock into the neutral space between vessels. I assure you, officer, I am well versed in both Earth and colonial law. Miller activated his handheld scanner without responding. Stand with your arms extended. Bennett complied, watching Miller's face as the scanner ran its course. The device would show nothing unusual beyond the encrypted diplomatic datapad he carried, which was protected by federal security clearances far above what Miller's scanner could access. The scanner beeped, indicating an encrypted device. Miller's expression shifted to one of triumph. You're carrying restricted technology, he stated. I'll need to confiscate that until we can verify your authorization. That would be inadvisable, Bennett replied. The device contains sensitive, diplomatic materials protected under Section 47 of the Interplanetary Security Act. Miller's comm unit beeped again, more urgently this time. He silenced it with an irritated tap. Everyone claims special privileges these days. We'll sort this out at the station. As Miller reached for his restraints, a second patrol vehicle pulled alongside them. The insignia indicated a captain's rank. Miller frowned as the airlock cycled, and Captain Susan Grant emerged, her expression a mixture of concern and horror. Officer Miller, she said sharply, why haven't you responded to Control's messages? Just conducting a routine stop, Captain. This individual has an encrypted device he claims is diplomatic. Captain Grant looked from Miller to Bennett, recognition dawning in her eyes. Justice Bennett, I sincerely apologize for this inconvenience. The color drained from Miller's face as he slowly turned back toward Bennett. Justice Warren Bennett, the captain continued, Supreme Court Justice of the United Federation and Special Envoy to the Arcturus Diplomatic Mission. Miller's scanner slipped from his fingers, floating in the low gravity of the connection tunnel. Bennett looked at the officer with eyes that had seen decades of both progress and stagnation. Perhaps we should continue this discussion through proper channels, Captain Grant. I believe this incident highlights some concerns I've been raising with the Colonial Council. As realization crashed over Officer Miller, Bennett simply waited, patient as always. This wasn't about one officer or one incident. The eyes of history, and now the eyes of potential alien allies, were watching how humanity handled its oldest challenges as it reached for the stars. Officer Miller stood frozen in the connection tunnel, his mind racing to process what Captain Grant had just revealed. The elderly black man he had stopped and nearly detained was Justice Warren Bennett, the most respected member of the Supreme Court and apparently a diplomatic envoy on a classified mission. I was just following protocol, Miller stammered, his earlier confidence evaporating. Captain Grant's expression remained stern. We'll discuss your version of protocol later, Officer Miller. She turned to Justice Bennett. Sir, please, accept my deepest apologies. If you'd prefer to file a formal complaint, I can begin the process immediately. Bennett studied Miller for a long moment. The officer avoided his gaze, staring instead at the scanner still floating between them in the low gravity. That won't be necessary yet, Captain, Bennett finally said. He reached out and gently caught the scanner, handing it back to Miller. Though I believe Officer Miller and I should continue our conversation under more appropriate circumstances. Miller reluctantly took the scanner, confusion evident on his face. He had expected immediate reprimand, possibly termination. Justice Bennett's measured response unsettled him more than anger would have. Return to your vessel and continue your patrol route, Officer Miller, Captain Grant ordered. Report to my office at 800 tomorrow. Her tone left no room for discussion. Miller nodded stiffly and retreated through the airlock to his patrol craft. As the connection tunnel disengaged, he watched through the viewport as Captain Grant escorted Justice Bennett back to his transport. Inside Bennett's vessel, Captain Grant's professional demeanor softened. Justice Bennett, I can't apologize. Enough. Officer Miller has had previous complaints, but nothing that would justify immediate dismissal under colonial regulations. Bennett settled back into the pilot's seat with a slight grimace. At 81, these confrontations were becoming more physically taxing, though he would never show it. How many complaints, Captain? And how many involved Earth-born citizens? Grant hesitated before answering. 17 in the past 3 years. 15 involved Earth-born travelers, 12 specifically from the southern regions. Bennett nodded, as if this confirmed something he already knew. And yet he remains on active patrol? The system, Grant began, then stopped herself. The review process is slow, and the burden of proof falls heavily on the complainants. Many don't follow through with the full process after filing initial reports. Because they don't believe it will make a difference, Bennett said. It wasn't a question. Captain Grant nodded reluctantly. I've tried to implement changes, but without support from the Colonial Council, my options are limited. Bennett activated his console, bringing up a secure communication channel. Perhaps it's time we address this at a higher level. Not just about Officer Miller, but about what his actions represent. As he spoke, Bennett unlocked a hidden compartment beneath his control panel. Inside was a small metallic device unlike anything produced by human technology. It pulsed with a faint blue light. Grant's eyes widened. Is that Arcturus technology? Yes, Bennett confirmed. A gift from First Minister Alarix after our successful negotiations. The Arcturus Coalition was humanity's first contact with advanced alien life. Unlike the scenarios from old Earth fiction, they hadn't arrived in massive ships or with hostile intent. Their small exploratory vessels had been detected near Neptune 3 years earlier, and cautious communication had eventually led to formal diplomatic relations. The negotiations were successful then? Grant asked. Bennett nodded. More than we dared hope. The Arcturus are willing to share their technology, including their revolutionary propulsion systems and medical advances. In return, they want assurance that humanity is ready for such advances. Ready in what way? They've been watching us for longer than we realized, Bennett said. They've observed our history, our conflicts, our slow progress toward equality. They're concerned about giving advanced technology to a species still divided by prejudice. The blue light from the Arcturus device pulsed more rapidly, as if responding to their conversation. They insisted on giving me this monitoring device, Bennett explained. It records emotional responses and provides real-time translation. They wanted to experience my return journey as I experienced it. Grant's face paled. You mean they witnessed what just happened with Officer Miller? Bennett nodded solemnly. Every moment, every word, every implied bias. This could jeopardize everything, Grant whispered. Perhaps, Bennett agreed. Or it could be the catalyst we need. The Arcturus value honesty above all. They don't expect perfection, but they do expect genuine effort toward growth. The blue light stabilized, casting soft shadows across the cockpit. Bennett placed his hand over the device and it responded with a gentle hum. They're listening now? Grant asked, her voice hushed. They're always listening through this device, Bennett said, and they're especially interested in how we handle this incident. Grant straightened her uniform. What do you need from me, Justice Bennett? First, I need to complete my journey to the Federal District. Then I need you to gather all records of similar incidents across all colonies. Not just complaints that were filed, but any that were dismissed or withdrawn. The Arcturus value complete information. And Officer Miller? Bennett considered this carefully. Officer Miller remains exactly where he is for now. His actions have created an opportunity. How we respond will tell the Arcturus more about humanity than any diplomatic meeting could. Grant nodded slowly, beginning to understand. This isn't just about one incident or one officer. It never is, Bennett replied. The Arcturus have a saying, the path of a civilization can be seen in how it treats its most vulnerable travelers. They believe how we handle internal conflicts predicts how we'll behave in galactic relations. As Bennett prepared to continue his journey, the Arcturus device pulsed once more. A series of symbols appeared on its surface, then translated into English text on Bennett's console screen. What does it say? Grant asked. Bennett read the message, then looked up with determined eyes. It says, "We are watching with hope. Proceed as you believe right, Justice Bennett. The Alliance depends on truth, not perfection." Grant felt the weight of those words. I'll have everything ready for you by the time you reach the Federal District. As Captain Grant departed, Bennett sat quietly with the Arcturus device. The confrontation with Officer Miller had been unpleasant, but not unexpected. What mattered now was what came next. Not just for him, but potentially for humanity's future among the stars. News of the incident between Officer Miller and Justice Bennett spread quickly through New Washington Colony. By the time Bennett's transport docked at the Federal District Terminal, a small crowd of reporters and officials had gathered. Drones hovered overhead, their lenses focused on the arrival platform. Bennett took a deep breath before opening his airlock. At 81, he had never sought the spotlight, preferring to work quietly within the system. But sometimes, he reminded himself, change required public attention. As he stepped onto the platform, voices called out from all directions. Justice Bennett, is it true you were illegally detained? Will you be pressing charges against Colonial Security? What impact will this have on the Arcturus negotiations? Bennett raised a hand, and the crowd fell silent. I was not detained, he said clearly. I experienced what many Earthborn citizens face daily in our colonies. I will address this matter through proper channels, beginning with a hearing before the Colonial Council. A tall man in a crisp Federation uniform pushed through the crowd. Admiral Paul Jackson, head of Federation security, approached with concern etched on his face. Justice Bennett, he said, extending his hand. I came as soon as I heard. This incident is completely unacceptable. Bennett shook the Admiral's hand firmly. Then let's make sure it doesn't happen again, to anyone. Admiral Jackson guided Bennett away from the reporters toward a private transit pod. Once inside and away from prying ears, Jackson's professional facade cracked slightly. Warren, the president, is furious. She wants Officer Miller dismissed immediately. One word from you and it's done. Bennett placed the Arcturus device on the seat between them. Its blue light pulsed steadily. And what message would that send, Paul? That we only address these issues when they happen to someone with power? Jackson eyed the alien device uneasily. Is that thing active? Always, Bennett replied. The Arcturus believe in complete transparency. They're watching how we handle this situation. All the more reason to show decisive action, Jackson argued. Miller's behavior reflects poorly on all of us. Bennett shook his head. Punishing one officer doesn't solve the systemic problem. The Arcturus aren't interested in retribution. They want to see if we're capable of genuine growth. The transit pod slowed as it approached Federation headquarters. Through the window, Bennett could see the massive structure of the Colonial Council, chamber where in just 2 hours he would present his case. I've requested Officer Miller's presence at the hearing, Bennett said. Jackson looked shocked. You want him there? Why? Because this isn't about punishing him. It's about changing the system that shaped him. Inside Federation headquarters, Bennett was escorted to a preparation room. Captain Grant was waiting, surrounded by stacks of data tablets. Justice Bennett, she said, standing quickly. I've gathered everything you requested. 372 similar incidents reported across all colonies in the past 5 years. 87% involved Earthborn citizens, 63% specifically from former southern regions. Bennett nodded grimly. And how many resulted in disciplinary action against the officers involved? 7%, Grant admitted. Most cases were dismissed for lack of evidence or procedural necessity. Bennett studied the data on the main screen. And Officer Miller? He's here, Grant confirmed, waiting in a separate room. He hasn't spoken much since yesterday. A gentle chime indicated someone at the door. When it slid open, a Federation aide entered with a diplomatic case. From the Arcturus Embassy, sir, the aide said, handing the case to Bennett. They said you would understand. When the aide left, Bennett opened the case. Inside was a small crystal sphere, similar to the monitoring device but larger and more elaborate. As Bennett lifted it, the sphere activated, projecting a holographic image of an Arcturus representative. The Arcturus appeared humanoid but taller and more slender, with skin that shifted colors subtly as they moved. Their large eyes blinked rarely, and when they spoke, their words were translated into English by the device. Justice Bennett, the Arcturus said, their voice melodic despite the translation. First Minister Ellerick sends his regards and a request. I'm listening, Bennett replied. We ask permission to observe your council hearing through this sphere. What happens today may determine the future of our alliance. Bennett looked at Captain Grant, who appeared nervous, but nodded her agreement. Permission granted, Bennett said. Will you participate or merely observe? We will observe only, the Arcturus replied. This is humanity's challenge to resolve. How you address it will tell us much. The hologram faded, but the sphere remained active, its surface swirling, with colors. They're really serious about this, aren't they? Captain Grant asked. They've been watching Earth for generations, Bennett explained. They've seen our wars, our civil rights movements, our progress and setbacks. They believe a species that cannot resolve its internal conflicts, cannot be trusted in interstellar relationships. A final chime indicated it was time to proceed to the council chamber. Bennett placed the Arcturus sphere in his pocket next to the original monitoring device. Both pulsed in unison. The Colonial Council chamber was packed with representatives from all human settlements. At the center sat the 12 elected councilors. To one side, a small security detail escorted Officer Miller to a designated seat. He looked uncomfortable in his formal uniform, eyes downcast. Bennett took his position at the speaker's platform. As a Supreme Court justice, he rarely addressed the council directly. This was an exceptional circumstance. Representatives of humanity, Bennett began, his voice steady and clear. I come before you not as a victim seeking redress, but as a witness to a persistent failure in our system. The chamber fell silent as Bennett recounted his experience with Officer Miller. He presented, no emotion, simply facts. When he finished the personal account, he gestured to Captain Grant, who activated the main display showing the statistics they had compiled. This is not about one incident or one officer, Bennett continued. It is about a pattern that reveals a deeper truth about who we are becoming as we reach for the stars. He removed the Arcturus monitoring device from his pocket, holding it up for all to see. Our first allies in the galaxy witnessed yesterday's incident through this device. They are watching us now, not to judge, but to understand if humans are ready for the responsibilities that come with advanced technology. Murmurs spread through the chamber. Many knew of the Arcturus negotiations, but not the details or stakes involved. Bennett turned to look directly at Officer Miller, who finally raised his eyes to meet the justice's gaze. Officer Miller is not the problem, Bennett said firmly. He is a symptom of a system that needs healing. I do not call for his punishment. Instead, I propose something more challenging: transformation. For him, for our security forces, and for all of us. The Arcturus sphere in Bennett's pocket glowed brighter, its light visible even through the fabric of his formal robes. The future of humanity's place among the stars hung in the balance, all because of what had seemed like a routine traffic stop. The Colonial Council chamber remained silent after Justice Bennett finished his opening statement. The 12 councilors exchanged glances, clearly unprepared for this approach. Head Councilor Diana Perry, a stern woman with decades of political experience, leaned forward. Justice Bennett, while we appreciate your perspective, the law is clear. Officer Miller violated multiple protocols. The evidence suggests racial bias motivated his actions. The standard penalty is dismissal. Bennett nodded patiently. The law also allows for alternative remedies when they better serve justice. I am proposing such a remedy. From his seat, Officer Miller watched with confusion. He had expected public humiliation, loss of his position, perhaps even criminal charges. Instead, Justice Bennett was suggesting something entirely different. What exactly are you proposing? Councilor Perry asked. Bennett touched a control on the speaker's platform, displaying a new set of images on the main screen. They showed training programs, community integration efforts, and data from colonies where security forces had implemented bias recognition systems. A comprehensive reform, Bennett explained. Officer Miller will undergo intensive training on the history of racial discrimination, spend time living among Earthborn communities, and then help implement new training for all security personnel. Councilor Leon Wright, A representative from the outer colonies scoffed. This sounds like rewarding bad behavior. The public expects consequences. The easiest path is punishment, Bennett acknowledged. It satisfies our desire for immediate justice. But does it create lasting change? The Arcturus sphere pulsed more intensely in Bennett's pocket. He placed it on the platform beside him, where it projected a soft field of light that seemed to analyze the emotions in the room. Bennett continued, The Arcturus have shared something remarkable with me. Their species once faced similar divisions, not based on appearance as we do, but on the region of their world where individuals originated. It nearly destroyed them. The council members leaned forward, suddenly more interested. Information about Arcturus culture was rare and valuable. They overcame this by focusing not on punishing those with bias, but on transforming their understanding. They believe we can do the same. From the gallery, Admiral Jackson stood. Justice Bennett, with respect, this is a human matter. Should alien perspectives influence our judicial process? Bennett's expression remained calm. The universe we're entering is filled with species unlike our own. If we cannot overcome bias against our own kind, how will we fare among truly different beings? The chamber erupted in discussion. Bennett waited patiently for order to return. During the commotion, he glanced at Officer Miller, who sat stiffly in his chair, eyes now fixed on the Arcturus sphere. When the room quieted, Bennett spoke again. I would like Officer Miller to address the council. Surprised murmurs filled the chamber. Counselor Perry hesitated, then nodded. Very unusual, but permitted under the circumstances. Officer Miller stood slowly, his hand shaking slightly as he approached the secondary speaker's platform. He looked around the chamber, at the faces watching him, some curious, others hostile. He began, then cleared his throat. I was following what I thought was proper procedure. Earthborn vessels are statistically more likely to. He stopped, seeming to hear his own words in a new light. When did your family first come to the colonies, Officer Miller? Bennett asked gently. My grandfather was on the first settlement ship, Miller replied with a hint of pride. 3 generations in space. And what did your grandfather tell you about Earth? Miller hesitated. That we left to escape the problems there. That those who stayed behind were stuck in old ways of thinking. Bennett nodded. A common perspective among early colonists. And how many Earthborn citizens have you personally known? Not stopped or questioned, but known. Miller looked down. None, sir. Yet you formed opinions about them. About Justice Bennett when you saw him. The chamber was silent now, everyone watching this unexpected exchange. I did, Miller admitted. I saw an old Earthborn man and made assumptions. And now? Miller looked up, meeting Bennett's gaze directly for the first time. Now I'm standing before the most respected justice in the Federation, a man who has traveled to meet with aliens, who holds the future of humanity in his hands, and I stopped him because of where he was born and the color of his skin. His voice cracked slightly. I'm asking myself how many others I misjudged. The Arcturus sphere pulsed brightly in response to Miller's words. A ripple of surprised whispers spread through the chamber. This, Bennett said, turning back to the council, is the beginning of transformation, not from fear of punishment but from recognition of truth. Counselor Perry studied Miller thoughtfully. Officer, would you willingly participate in Justice Bennett's proposed program? It would be intensive, possibly humiliating at times, and would require you to confront uncomfortable truths. Miller straightened his shoulders. Yes, Counselor. I believe I need to. Bennett touched the Arcturus sphere. It projected a larger hologram of First Minister Alarix, who now addressed the council directly. We have observed this proceeding with great interest, the alien diplomat said, their form shifting through subtle colors. Justice Bennett's approach mirrors our own historical solution. We find hope in this. Counselor Perry rose to her feet. First Minister, this is an unprecedented intervention in our internal affairs. Not intervention, Alarix corrected. Observation. The technology we would share with humanity could advance your development by centuries, or misused, it could destroy you. We needed to understand if you were ready. And are we? Perry asked bluntly. Alarix's form shifted to a deep blue. That depends on what happens next. We do not require perfection. We require honest effort toward growth. Bennett stepped forward again. I propose a formal vote, not merely on Officer Miller's case, but on implementing these reforms throughout our colonies. The council members exchanged glances. This had transformed from a simple disciplinary hearing into a referendum on humanity's future. Such a vote would normally require weeks of preparation, Councillor Wright objected. We don't have weeks, Bennett replied. The Arcturus delegation leaves our system in 3 days. Their recommendation to their government depends on what they witness here. The Arcturus sphere pulsed rhythmically, scanning the emotional responses of everyone present. Bennett could feel the weight of history pressing down on this moment. Centuries of human struggle with prejudice, the future of interstellar relations, and the fate of one officer who had made a mistake, all converging in this chamber. Very well, Councillor Perry declared. We will vote now on Justice Bennett's proposal. The future of humanity may indeed depend on our decision. As the council prepared to vote, Officer Miller returned to his seat. He looked at Justice Bennett with new eyes, not seeing an elderly black man from Earth, but a visionary who had offered him redemption instead of punishment. For the first time, Miller understood what it truly meant to protect and serve all citizens, regardless of their origin. 1 year had passed since the historic Colonial Council vote. On a bright morning in the new Washington Colony Training Center, Trent Miller stood before a class of 30 new security recruits. The classroom walls displayed images of Earth and the colonies alongside pictures of the Arcturus homeworld shared by the alien allies. My name is Trent Miller, he began, his voice steady. 1 year ago, I was a patrol officer who thought I was doing my job correctly. I was wrong. The recruits sat up straighter, recognizing the name from their required reading on colonial history. None had expected to meet the man in person. I stopped a transport piloted by an elderly black man from Earth, Miller continued. I saw his origin, his age, his skin color, and I made assumptions. Those assumptions led me to violate his rights and nearly derailed humanity's most important diplomatic relationship. Miller walked slowly across the front of the classroom. At 43, he looked older than a year ago, but also more at peace. That man was Supreme Court Justice Warren Bennett. And instead of demanding my dismissal, he offered me something more valuable, the chance to change. Miller activated the room's display system. A video began playing, showing the Colonial Council chamber during the vote 1 year earlier. The councilors looked solemn as they cast their votes on Justice Bennett's proposal. The council voted 9-3 in favor of comprehensive reform, Miller explained. And I became the first participant in the Bennett program. The recruits watched attentively as Miller described his year-long journey. He had spent 3 months living in an Earth-born community within the colony, learning their customs and hearing their stories. He had studied the history of racial discrimination, from ancient Earth conflicts through the early colonial period. Finally, he had helped design the very training program he now taught. The statistics don't lie, Miller said, displaying a new set of data. In the past year, complaints against security forces have dropped 62%. More importantly, community trust has increased 78%. As Miller continued his lecture, he noticed a figure standing at the back of the classroom. Justice Warren Bennett, now 82 years old, had entered quietly. Despite his age, he stood tall, his eyes bright and alert as he observed the class. Miller nodded respectfully to Bennett, then turned back to the recruits. Today you'll hear directly from someone who experienced the consequences of biased policing, not just once, but throughout his life. Bennett walked slowly to the front of the room. The recruits stood in respect for the Supreme Court justice, but he waved them back to their seats with a gentle hand. Please sit, Bennett said. I'm here as a fellow citizen, not as a justice today. Bennett looked at Miller with approval. Officer Miller has shown us what transformation truly means. It isn't easy, It requires confronting uncomfortable truths about ourselves, but the results speak for themselves. He activated his personal tablet, displaying images from the recently established Arcturus embassy. The alien structure gleamed in the colony's central district, its unusual architecture a symbol of the new alliance. 1 year ago, the Arcturus Coalition watched our council vote with great interest, Bennett explained. They were not expecting perfection. They were looking for capacity to grow, to recognize our flaws and address them honestly. A recruit raised her hand. Sir, is it true they've shared their propulsion technology with us? The news networks say we'll be able to reach Alpha Centauri in days rather than years. Bennett nodded. Phase 1 of technology sharing began 3 months ago, but more important than the technology itself is what we're learning about ourselves. In the process, another recruit spoke up. My family is from Earth, southern region. Before the reforms, my parents warned me not to apply for the security forces. They said I wouldn't be welcome. He looked at Miller. Your training program is why I'm here. Miller appeared moved by this statement. He glanced at Bennett, who nodded encouragingly. The universe is vast, Bennett told the class. We will encounter species far different from ourselves. If we cannot respect the small variations among humans, how will we handle truly alien perspectives? At that moment, the classroom door opened again. First Minister Alarix of the Arcturus entered, accompanied by 2 aides. The alien diplomat's skin shifted through colors as they observed the human gathering. First Minister, Bennett said, clearly surprised, we're honored by your presence. Alarix moved gracefully to the front of the room. The recruits stared in fascination. Most had never seen an Arcturus in person. I wished to observe the fruits of what began 1 year ago, Alarix said, their words translated by a small device on their chest. Our council was correct to approve the alliance. Miller stood tall as the alien diplomat approached him. First Minister, welcome to our training facility. Alarix's skin shifted to a deep purple, which Bennett recognized as their expression of approval. You were once what my people would call a catalyst of change, Officer Miller. Your actions created an opportunity for growth. I was simply doing the wrong thing at the right time, Miller replied honestly. Alarix made a sound that the translator rendered as laughter. Sometimes that is exactly what progress requires. The alien turned to address the recruits. Your training here matters beyond your colony. It matters to the future of human-Arcturus relations, and to the broader galactic community you will soon join. A murmur ran through the class at this hint of other intelligent species waiting to be discovered. After Alarix departed, Miller concluded the day's session. As the recruits filed out, he approached Bennett, who had remained behind. Justice Bennett, Miller said, I never properly thanked you. Bennett shook his head. You've thanked me through your actions, Officer Miller. Every day you teach these recruits, you honor what happened between us. It still bothers me, Miller admitted. How easily I fell into biased thinking. How many others I must have misjudged before you. That awareness is valuable, Bennett said. Hold on to it, let it guide you. Miller nodded thoughtfully. The Arcturus said I was a catalyst of change, but really you were. You could have demanded punishment, made an example of me. Punishment ends a conversation, Bennett replied. Transformation begins one. As they walked together toward the exit, Bennett paused to look at a large display showing Earth from orbit, alongside images of the colonies and now, the Arcturus homeworld. My grandfather told me stories about fighting for civil rights in old America, Bennett said quietly. He never lived to see humans reach the stars, but he always believed our greatest journey would not be outward to other worlds, but inward, to better understanding of ourselves. Miller considered this. And now, that journey has cosmic implications. It always did, Bennett said with a smile. We just didn't know it yet. Outside the training center, the artificial sky of New Washington Colony gleamed with simulated sunlight. In the distance, construction had begun on the new Interspecies Academy, where humans and Arcturus would study together. What had started with a simple traffic stop had evolved into something that would shape humanity's place among the stars for generations to come. Bennett watched young recruits of all backgrounds walking together toward their next class. "This is how change happens," he said. "Not all at once, but person by person, encounter by encounter. We become the species we choose to be." Miller nodded, finally understanding the full meaning of what it truly meant to protect and serve, not just his community or his colony, but humanity's future among the stars.